Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Eric Voss, Interim Director of the Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture and Development here at Texas A&M. It is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to our second presentation in our Borlaug Seminar Speaker Series. We're really excited because we have several of our own Borlaug Institute staff that were presenting. And with that in mind, let me introduce to you the leader of this team, Dr. Roger Norton. Dr. Norton currently serves as our Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and also doing double duty. He also serves as Director of the Center for Coffee Research and Education. Dr. Norton received his PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins. He has worked for the World Bank, working on development projects in over 50 countries. He's lived in Latin America for 23 years and also lived in Asia for 3. He is fluent in Spanish and reads French and Portuguese. So Dr. Norton, if you'll introduce the rest of your team, we'll go ahead and get started, but we're so excited about hearing this presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Voss. Thanks to everyone for participating today. Thanks to the Borlaug Institute and Ambassador Voss for this opportunity to present what we think is a very important piece of research and a very interesting project. I will let my colleagues present themselves individually when their turn comes to speak. But I just want to mention that this project is led by Dr. Ishdorj of Agricultural Economics here at Texas A&M, and also by Elizabeth Tabares here of the Borlaug Institute here. They've been working very hard on this project for more than a year and have produced a 200-page report, which we will try to summarize as best we can, which covers a lot of ground and is unprecedented research in this area. The team that we have involved in this is actually quite extensive. We have 2 collaborators from our library, our superb librarians. Margaret Foster, for example, has produced the only book for librarians on systematic reviews, which is in existence in this country at least. And we've had the good fortune to have many graduate students from agricultural economics also participating with this, because it's been an immense effort involving looking at more than 4,000 documents to see what is relevant. The topic is a topic that is of great concern for small farmers. Small farmers are the major producers of food supply in the world in relation to the gross agricultural area, including fallow and forested areas and so on. They produce 1/3 of the world's food supply from 1/4 of the world's gross agricultural area. So they're more productive than medium and large scale farms per hectare, but of course, since they're small, sustainable livelihoods is a serious concern for them. And part of that is access to markets, a big part of that, to get better prices and opportunities to sell their crops. The issues that they face are serious and pervasive throughout the developing world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. First of all, they have problems with volume. A woman walking down a path with a bag of mangoes to sell is not going to be able to access high value mango export markets. So volume is a critical issue for them to enable them to get more remunerative, into more remunerative markets for their products. Also, quality is a big issue because often the quality is defective and sometimes it just happens in the post-harvest process or in the transportation storage process. Sometimes it's the genetic material they're using, which is inadequate for quality. But the point is that they don't have access to information and about improved quality and the quality requirements of markets and ways to improve that quality. And this is the next point, that they don't have access to information about technology in general in agriculture, not only for quality. Also, their long distance from marketing points is a serious concern. This has been found, for example, in Peru with the Andean communities, and where rural roads made a huge difference for them. And also their contracts for sale and also for purchase of inputs are usually verbal, and they're often informal and unreliable. And sometimes the contracts simply don't hold up. So they have a lot of issues in spite of their productivity per hectare, which is very high on their farms. They have a lot of problems in actually earning sustainable incomes. So cooperatives can provide an answer to this. And these are some of the things that cooperatives can do, and my colleagues will talk about that. Obviously, scaling up volumes, taking advantage of economies of scale, exploring new marketing opportunities, and so on. So cooperatives are a very important link in the entire value chain for agriculture globally, especially for the smallholders. And they offer a potential solution. The problem is that we don't have systematic evidence on how effective cooperatives are, and almost no quantitative analysis of that evidence. So that's what this study is all about. It's a worldwide review of what is available everywhere, as I mentioned, a huge number of documents that we've reviewed, and an analysis of that evidence. This analysis builds upon something done by an organization called Social Impact, which is a leader in systematic reviews, but it goes far beyond that in terms of coverage of documents, and also in terms of the rigor of the methodology and the kinds of topics explored. So this is what we have been doing. We think it's very important to document the role of cooperatives, or if there were not documentable effects of cooperatives in certain cases, we need to, bring that out too. So that's what we're looking at. We also looked at some issues for which we don't have quantitative evidence necessarily, but we looked at the role of country conditions, crop types, organizational structure of cooperatives. We tried to look at mechanisms for achieving the observed effect, and those are very important, and there's quite a discussion about that in our research. And then finally, we wanted to highlight the gaps in quantitative literature about the effect of cooperatives, so that other researchers, as well as our own team, can pursue them in the future. So in short, it's an extremely comprehensive and quantitative, to the extent possible, study of the effects of cooperatives really on smallholder incomes and their technology adoption and many other issues. There's nothing like it to date so far in its coverage. Now I will turn the podium over to my colleagues who've done an extraordinary job. We'll start with Dr. Ishdorj. She can introduce herself, as well as talk about her role in the research and the things that she's been a leader in our research methodology. Thank you, Aryan.
Thank you, Dr. Norton. So I'm an associate professor in a Department of Agricultural Economics, and I am a part of this big project team that looked at the effect of cooperatives on farmers' outcome. And today we are going to present part of our research findings, where we look at how membership in farmers, organizations, and cooperatives affect few of the farmers' outcomes, and provide our findings from our quantitative results. So to answer the questions that we've specified, we reviewed the theory of agricultural cooperatives and organizations. So the figure here, it looks very messy. However, it helped us summarize the main theoretical elements that we've extracted from the theoretical literature regarding how cooperatives could work and the effects of their organizational structures on farmers. This figure serves for us as a roadmap for designing our systematic review and interpreting our results. From the theoretical framework that we've developed in the previous slide, we also developed a logic model. Here we are showing a simplified version of the logic model that kind of shows the flow and the effect of farmers' participation in the cooperatives and what outcomes it might affect. So farmers make a decision to participate in cooperatives based on the advantages the membership will offer them in achieving the market and social outcomes over working alone. So cooperatives can help farmers through four main strategies. These include the reduction in transaction costs, realizing the economies of scale, developing market power, and policy advocacy. So as a result of cooperative membership, significant improvements would be expected for farmers' technology adoption. As a result of that, increased yield and productivity and access to markets, and also result in efficiency in the production. These, in the end, will increase farmers' income and the welfare and food security and improve the poverty. In developing our systematic review, we used the PICOS analytic framework in designing the outline. So PICOS stands for Population, Intervention, Comparison, Outcomes, and Study Design. So all the studies that looked at farmers, smallholders, and agricultural producers in developing countries were included in the systematic review. Based on our preliminary studies, we developed came up with the interventions that we were going to include in the study. Our comparisons group would be cooperative members and non-members, and the outcomes of interest will come in two different levels. We defined an intermediate outcome that include technology adoption, production, productivity, and etc. And the final outcome as a result of the intermediate outcome is the farmers' income, food security, well-being of farmers, and farming households. So we included the experimental and quasi-experimental studies in this research, and studies that were published after 2000, written in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. So as you notice, we had a huge research team, people with multiple skills and also who spoke multiple different languages, including Dr. Norton, who helped us also search for the literature in Portuguese and Spanish. So the figure here gives us an idea of how systematic review is usually done. So researchers develop the research question, and then they develop a protocol. So in our case, since we have multiple outcomes for farmers, our protocol would be quite evolved. So for each systematic review, for each outcome of interest, we develop a protocol, and later on we combined the outcomes and done one big systematic review, kind of help us to draw a conclusion. So in this review, we followed Campbell collaboration and 3IE guidelines, and since the systematic reviews need to be well done, systematic reviews need to be transparent, rigorous, and minimize the bias. What we did is we did record and report all the methods we used. Also for each study we've done a quality assessment. And for each study, we used a systematic coding of the records. And if possible, we extracted data and conducted meta-analysis. Here are the steps we followed in our review. So our librarians searched the databases and extracted all the data. In addition, the research team did the manual searches and looked for the data, studies. So all the studies were uploaded into Rayon, a web-based systematic review tool. And for the steps 2, 3, and 4, study screening, risk of bias, and data extraction, each record was evaluated by more than 2 researchers, and the additional researcher resolved the conflict. We used Cohen's d. We calculated the effect size, and for this specific review, we used Cohen's d for the meta-analysis. So we conducted multiple different kinds of meta-analysis. We did univariate, multivariate, robust variance analysis. This is because we have multiple different outcomes for farmers. So the univariate would look at individual outcomes, whereas multivariate and robust variance would combine some of the outcomes together. So we came up with the statistical method to make different outcomes comparable to include into one statistical analysis. So for the studies where we were not able to extract quantitative data, we used narrative synthesis analysis, and we provided tabular results summarizing the literature. The main method that we used is that we compared the statistical distributions for members and non-members of cooperatives. So the Cohen's d itself measures the distance in standard deviations between the means of the 2 groups. So for each study, we had to custom tailor and develop or design or choose a specific formula for effect size calculation and Cohen's d, because studies that we included in this review use different estimation methods, and also the reporting of the results and the data that provided to us and information provided varied. So we had to calculate and use the different formulas. In total, as shown in this figure, over 4,000 studies were retrieved from database searches. All abstracts were uploaded into Rayon, and then the titles and abstracts were reviewed. So after reviewing the duplicates, we reviewed a total of 4,478 abstracts and titles. We removed quite a few non-relevant studies. These were the qualitative studies, or studies that only compared the means between the two population groups of members and non-members, and or etc. We completed selected studies for which we could do full text reading. So the full text reading was done for 336 records. As a result, 213 studies were assessed for risk of bias. It means we measured the quality of the studies and the science scores. So only studies with low and medium risk of bias were included in this systematic review. It means that we selected 46 studies, out of which 36 will be used in meta-analysis. So on the right here, we listed the reasons we excluded certain studies, and our research team had to keep a very detailed documentation of why we kept some studies versus why we excluded the others. So the slide here kind of gives us characteristics of the studies that we included in this review. So out of 46 studies, they were done in 27 developing countries, and the studies were published between 2008 and 2019. 33 studies were done in Africa, 9 in Asia, 4 in Latin America. By countries' income, 53% of studies were conducted in low-income countries versus 16 in the upper and mid-income countries. 40 studies used cross-sectional data and 6 used panel data. Farmers self-select themselves to become members of cooperatives or farmer organizations. So it means there is some kind of a self-selection bias going on. So all the studies we included in this report at some point had to address the self-selection bias, either using statistical techniques, and most of the studies did. The common methods they used were propensity score matching, instrumental variables, treatment effect models, 2-stage and 3-stage least squares, and non-linear least square regression models. In this review, we summarized, so one of the reasons we excluded some high risk of bias studies is because there was a spillover effect. So we investigated or evaluated studies based on their potential biases in their reporting or in their analysis reporting, on the outcome reporting, or in the design. So the spillover bias was the most frequently occurring bias for studies that were graded high risk of bias. Most of these studies assume that cooperative non-member groups is independent of the member group, that reduce the potential risk of bias, but that assumption was not justified per se, that they never really use appropriate methodology or test for the relevance. Okay, the top 3 categories of the domain here listed are outcome reporting, analysis reporting, and other biases were the least frequently appearing biases reported, and we call them is a selective reporting bias. So all the studies included in this review seem to use primary collected data. However, it was not clear whether these surveys included verification of self-reported outcomes or they use actual farmers' records. So most of the studies used multivariate analysis. However, some studies failed to report important estimation outputs such as sample statistics or t-values. This is the reason we ended up with only 46 studies for our empirical analysis. Elizabeth Tabares is now going to discuss some of our quantitative research findings that we found for this part of the report.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for attending the seminar. I think really data would be a very good topic to present in the Borlaug seminar. So we hope this could be very informative to the audience, share the good things that the Borlaug Institute indeed does in research. From all the data that we collected from all the studies, we could categorize the data in 6 outcomes that is presented in the first column: technology adoption, production, marketed surplus, price, income, and poverty. Because of the wide variability in concepts and measurements, that classification needed to go deeper, and we classify those outcomes in subcategories. We try to do a very careful exercise of checking that we are going to compare things that are comparable, as many of the experts in meta-analysis often suggest that we should be doing. So, for example, when we say income, some studies report income from product sale, and some studies report total income. And although those measurements are correlated, indeed there are important differences behind each measurement that it's important to take into account to have some conclusions. So in this table, we brought some examples of what kind of measurements are classified in subcategories and in those outcomes. The usual graphical way to show the results from meta-analysis, we can see that here the effect size of each study that we calculated with the data the study provides. The size of this effect size is related to the weight, it's the contribution to the overall cost effect. The lines represent the confidence interval for that effect size estimated, and this is how a meta-analysis looks like. Here, if we say that the overall effect of cooperatives on input use is 0.32, we are saying that the two populations are 32 standard deviation apart in reference to the input use being higher for members. So we have here an estimation that is significant at 95%. It's we have a lower bound of 0.2 and an upper bound of 0.44. This means that indeed farmers are having more opportunities to use inputs to improve their production derived from the cooperative membership. This using the Cohen's suggested scale, which is D equals 0.2 for small effect sizes, B equals 0.5 for medium effects, and D Cohen's 0.8 for large effects. We can say that here this estimation is somewhat small effect and medium effect. Small effect is really that an effect that needs analytical methods to be noticed, but effects are really effects that could be seen at naked eye. So basically, when we can have some samples of members and non-members, we can see that effectively it's easy to see that a group is superior to other in that indicator. Here is another forest plot for adoption of practices. Adoption of practices here includes practices like irrigation, control management, soil amendments, and that kind of good practices to improve productivity. And we can see that all the studies report a positive effect. And of course, the overall effect is going to be positive and significant. This kind of analysis we have been done for each of the subcategories of the outcomes and the outcomes. So after doing all this analysis individually, we have a table that summarizes all the analysis we did. So this column shows the univariate meta-analysis as the forest plot that I showed before. For all the outcomes and the subcategories, we found that the effect is positive and significant. And we see that for outcomes at the beginning of our causal path, the hypothesized causal path that we built from theoretical findings, we see that in the beginning, the effect of cooperatives can be seen more easily that those outcomes that are downstream in the. This is a very clean analysis. Univariate is the most frequent and conventional analysis done, but it has a problem is that several authors have discussed on that this method could overestimate the variance and lead to biased estimates. So if we can have good data and a good number of observations, we can try to do more fancy methods. more robust methods to estimate those outcomes jointly, recognizing that they have some correlation between them, and that we try to do a multivariate meta-analysis for the joint estimation of the 5 outcomes. And we had these results here. For some of them, we had more precise confidence intervals, and the results are very similar, but we can think that those confidence intervals could be better. And also we can test better heterogeneity and other kind of properties for the whole evidence that we couldn't do with univariate meta-analysis due to few observations within each category of outcome. We also robust variance meta-analysis. That is a nice method that give us the opportunity to use all the information that is available. So we don't need to get rid of many data or trying to have a better estimation one per study. This method allows to include more than one observation per outcome per study. We can take advantage of the data, and basically another advantage of this method is that allows to estimate an overall effect across all the outcomes. So we got these numbers. Having an effect size near to 0.3 means that the average member had a better overall indicator than 62 of non-members. So cooperatives could make a really big difference in some context for some farms. So that one was our answer for question 1. That's the quantification of the effect of cooperatives on those farmers' outcomes. So for us to answer our question number 2, to see how important could be context on achieving these effects, we tried to do the meta-regression with post-hoc moderators, and we create dummy variables for 3 specific aspects that we wanted to evaluate. One was the income of the country, the income level of the country, the category of the crop, or the type of crop, and if the method was important in defining the effect sizes. So we found the results, and basically we have 2 suggestive stories that could be outlined here. Just suggestive and just outlined. For low-income countries, we can say that the study reporting low-income countries show that farmers have a lower technology adoption rate than the other countries. Those farmers tend to bring to the market more product, and they get lower product price for their product. This is consistent with the theoretical results where the supply cooperatives maximize quantity and is related to open memberships. It could be a very important, it has some theory behind, and it could be very exciting to continue searching and investigating in this topic. The other story is cash crops. Cash crops seems to be the studies for cash crops show that the production level for those farmers is lower than the average in the sample that we got, and the price that they get is higher. So this is consistent with other objectives of maximization, and that is, it suggests that that kind of cooperative try to keep prices high, and they could be done by reducing closing membership or advocacy or improving quality. So still more research to elucidate what is happening, but this is interesting because it's aligned with theory. For answering our third question, what is the role of organizational structure? Theory says that there are two characteristics in cooperatives that make a structure important. The first one is membership policy. So it's well known that to achieve some degree of market power, closed cooperatives, closed membership is a requirement. Closed cooperatives could have a larger effect on prices than open cooperatives. This couldn't be tested with the evidence that we included, but the only two studies that tried to address this question found different results. For tobacco clubs, the price there was no difference in prices, but the difference in income, higher income for closed cooperatives, is related to a higher yield. And for the watermelon cooperatives in China, the effects of closed cooperatives are positive in both prices and income. So those remain as case studies, but this topic needs more research. The other characteristic is the reliance on unallocated retaining earnings, and we didn't have any evidence on this aspect. So it calls attention that these specific elements that theory says are important have not been tested directly in the empirical evidence. What is clear is from empirical evidence, we know that individual production and remuneration would be done individually, and marketing and land acquisition and other acquisition of resources that need collective action should be done collectively. Marketing cooperatives are superior to livelihood cooperatives in terms of performance and outcomes for farmers, and collective market is better than individual market. This is our summary of all our research. It includes our quantitative findings and the narrative findings from all the evidence included. Please don't panic that those are just profit functions. It shows how farmers, members of cooperatives and non-members of cooperatives make money. So we have a profit function that is the price times the quantity that they sold minus the cost of production minus the transaction cost minus the membership cost plus the dividend. So this would be profit function for members and a different profit function for non-members that still include membership and dividends and face their own transaction costs. What we found quantitative here is this. So we found that input use, practice adoption are higher for farmers that are members of cooperatives. Production yield and efficiency is higher for members. Marketable surplus and commercialization is higher for members. Price could be higher for members. And in general, profit function, profit from income and income is higher for members. What we have done, we have found information or data in the literature is in red. We didn't find good enough studies that address how cooperatives reduce cost of production, reduce cost of transaction for members. And this remains as gaps in knowledge. We didn't also have a sound train on the environment needed for cooperatives to succeed and fulfill their role. And we also don't have too much information on the possible paths that literature discussed as important, but we just extracted from different of the studies as case studies, but we couldn't find that that's definitely something that is happening in the performance of cooperatives. We have found that cooperatives have some important association with improvement of food security and poverty reduction or well-being indicators, but that also requires more rigorous information and more rigorous research and more information. The whole body of the evidence that we included says extension services are important. Cooperatives have an important role in providing extension services that is going to be translated in higher productivity, higher rates of technology adoption. The discussion is that there are many ways that could be achieved from this because they allows to share knowledge. It is possible for people share the risk of adopting a new technology. So that kind of collective support is important. Also, the linkages to which the cooperatives go within value chains are also important in defining technology adoption or productivity. The cooperatives have a well-known capacity on reduce information constraints for members and also for non-members, and that is why spillover effects are very important. It's very difficult to get rid of the spillover effects that a cooperative can have on market on where they are. Also, the cooperatives support farmers to achieve their own aspirations. They help farmers to access financial markets and financial and credit services. It's not the same for a member to go with the support of the cooperative that or go to the market, the credit market without the support of cooperative. And finally, they share the risk of marketing and participate in new markets. So basically, those are the mechanisms that have been discussed in all the evidence that we include. So gaps in knowledge, this is our last question. So this synthesis could identify suggestive insights on the role of contextual variables like income-based category or the country type of crops, but it's not a conclusive pattern. The data used in primary studies do not provide evidence to elucidate the possible role of organizational structure in cooperatives. Just few studies did that, and their measurement is not aligned to the theoretical development. And the primary studies are suggestive on the pathway, but we couldn't test any of those pathways. So they remain theoretical or conceptual. Additional gaps that we found is the studies don't consider the stage of the life cycle of cooperatives or correlation among indicators. There is no long-term and experimental evaluation designs that help us to understand better the causal effects along the path of the change. It is required to have more comprehensive empirical approaches postulated in the new institutional economic literature. In that graph that I showed, there are a lot of red things that we don't know. So those could be addressed with new institutional literature development and evidence of heterogeneous impacts on farmers' outcomes, depending on socioeconomic characteristics like age, sex, marital status, wealth. they are not conclusive across the whole body of the evidence, and it's really important because policy targeting has to be uh, done with good information to get the best results of the money that is invested in policy. And finally, we have underrepresentation of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as other regions of Asia. This is not the only case for this review. I have worked in other reviews in similar topics and have read a lot of reviews on related topics. And Latin America is behind on the information that is included here. It would be interesting to know if it is a problem of getting the information to the level of publications, or indeed it's not a priority in research in Latin America. So now Dr. Norton is going to present you the conclusion of this study, and hopefully we presented interesting results for your work and your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you hear me? Yes, I want to say, by the way, before we wrap this up briefly and allow space for comments and questions, this has been a study supported by the USDA, and it's a multifaceted study. It has two other major components, and for which we're also involving some expert faculty members from agricultural economics. So this is one of the three main components of this multi-year and multi-country study in the other components. On the conclusions, yes, we have found that cooperatives are effective institutions. If you look at those confidence intervals for the results on all of the outcomes and the meta-analysis, multivariate analysis, they don't go into the negative territory. In other words, with 95% confidence, we can say that yes, cooperatives are having a positive effect, and we use this, this Cohen's d, this standard deviation difference between the means of these two distributions as the variable. But the important point is that the confidence interval is very high. Obviously, with the details of this study, we found that cooperatives do have an effect on adoption of inputs and practices, as well as aggregating production and access to better access to inputs and resources and to knowledge and so on. So they do play multiple roles to achieve their effects. The effects, also depend upon the market structure in which they are in. That's clear, but the effects are positive across different market structures. One thing that's relevant is the incorporation of cooperatives into value chains, which is especially important for high value products. We found independently that value chains tend to be stable, tend to hold up over time with more specialized high value products, and they are not as necessarily going to be as stable, as enduring for more basic food grains or food products, which are more lower in value and more widely distributed in terms of producers and buyers. The cooperatives effects, importantly, are on incomes are very positive and significant, and we can quantify that in saying that around 58% of cooperative members will have a better income, receive a better price, and get a better access to markets. And of course, this is across many kinds of cooperatives, and as Elizabeth has emphasized, if we look more into cooperative structures, the strength of cooperatives, their administrative capabilities, as well as the kind of structure they have, we'll undoubtedly find in future research that some kinds of cooperatives have an even stronger effect, and others have a somewhat weaker effect. They are basically attractive institutions for smallholders. Having said that, we know from other research that sometimes it takes years to consolidate a cooperative and be sure it has strong administration and it's strong relationships with its members and functions well for them in all respects. So it's not easy necessarily to build a good cooperative, but the results of this study show that it's worth the effort. So what we want to do is to be able to disaggregate the results a little bit more in terms of the pathways to the effects and the structure of cooperatives in the future. But there's nothing like this in the literature now in terms of the comprehensiveness of the review of the literature and what is known to date about the effects of cooperatives. So thank you all for this, for listening to the presentation and for participating.
Thank you so much, and everyone have a very good rest of the day. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I think
Thank
Danette
you.
had a question, but anyway.
Well, what? So who had a question?
From Danette, yes?
Well, no, I just want to thank you for your presentation, and I think I'll need to watch the videos a couple of times because the amount of information was tremendous, and I think I believe it's a study that many people will continue to look back on. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Danette. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jeanette. Everyone have a very good day, and thank you again for joining us.